son. Where'd you find this?
Buckle up, buttercups. It's time to get down to business. It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Totally legit.
It's the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast, and we're here, and we're back again, and look who we got. We got Dave Gashaw.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
He has returned. What was the last one we did on here?
Let's see here. We did a run there where we were talking about World War II, and I think the last one was Hitler escaping to South America.
Oh, yeah. The whole Argentina angle, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been a minute. We were just talking before we started recording. I've been having a lot of guests on here who have been like blowing my mind with the things that they do, so I'm happy to get back to the roots. You know, this is really where this show started, was unpacking fringe shit from the internet.
Yeah.
And today, you know, we've got a very interesting topic. This is something that's come up on the podcast before, but we've never done a deep dive on. Today, we're going to talk about Skull and Bones. Super spooky. Yeah, I think the funniest thing about this whole situation to me is just how sinister the lore is. The lore is super spooky and sinister about Skull and Bones.
Yeah. I mean, it's got its own movie, you know, The Skulls with
Josh Hartnett or
Joshua Jackson. And what's the one guy who's dead? Paul Walker.
Oh, bummer. Damn. Skull and Bones, they got him.
Yeah,
they got him.
He knew too much. He got too close.
Yeah, I guess he flew too close to the sun. Very Icarus of him. But
yeah.
So we're going to talk about Skull and Bones. Of course, we're talking about the secret society at Yale. And I guess I remember I was in maybe middle school when I heard about Skull and Bones, and it was probably like Tim Russert asking John Kerry and Bush, respectively, about their involvement in Skull and Bones. But when did you first hear about Skull and Bones?
Probably about the same time, and I would have been in high school when that was going on, and didn't look too far into it. That's something that I would have got interested in later on down the road, but that's probably the first time it came across my radar. You know, we've all seen the clips where, you know, well, I can't tell you about it because it's a secret.
Yeah, That's like, I feel like that's a lot of people, at least in our generation, that was the gateway. It's like, what the fuck are they talking about?
Yeah. And now we know. And it sounds like what we now know is, looking at people like John Kerry and what we know about Skull and Bones, you're like, yeah, of course that guy was in it. Duh.
I mean, and George Bush, the same thing. Duh, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. You know, there's this conspiracy is funny because it's like, with time, this one has gotten less sinister. I think the more people know about it and the more people understand about it, the less sinister it becomes. But there are some very interesting aspects that must be analyzed. So, is it weird that elite kids that go to elite schools, that join elite fraternities, want to feel even more elite and would create their own, basically, fraternity? That all makes sense to me. That's not weird shit. Like, that's like
right.
The life that they have grown up in is, you know, being a part of an elite family, going to elite institutions, belonging to the elite clubs that you can only be a member of if you're in that echelon of society. And what I think a lot of people don't understand, too, is that, especially with the Ivy Leagues, there are a ton of these types of orders. Like, you know, basically fraternal orders that they're connected to the school by virtue of legacy, but the school doesn't own them. Like this Skull and Bones or any of the other Yale secret societies, they're just like a fraternity. They're on the campus, they operate on the campus, but Yale doesn't own the fraternities. Yale doesn't own the secret societies. another, like they're privately owned, they're private institutions, and they can kind of do whatever they want, but within, you know, some reason. But what I think people don't realize is the scale. Like Princeton's got a bunch, Harvard has got a ton, and one thing I kind of learned researching this topic is that Yale isn't, like, there's probably some weirder shit at Harvard, because Harvard's the older school, and Harvard has like a little bit more of a distinguished reputation than Yale does.
Right.
They're like the big two in terms of Ivy League schools, but Harvard is, like, I guess the closer connection to old school England and Oxford, so it's got like this superior amongst the Ivy Leagues. Harvard is supposedly like the more superior, and like the people that go there feel more entitled and superior than the people that go to Yale. I don't know. I've never been to any of them, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be the expert on that.
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if you could you just go visit those? I mean, they seem too elite to even go on, but
well,
I'm sure you probably could.
You can for sure go there. I mean, I used to do that festival, Boston Calling, and that was on Harvard campus.
Oh, yeah.
It was sick. You know, it was just like a whole music festival, a huge music festival on Harvard campus. But, you know, could you get into the secret clubs? Probably not. They probably keep us safely away. Yeah, they keep us safely away from the tomb, and they would not let us in there. But anyways, we're gonna dig into this a little bit, and maybe hopefully get a better understanding of what this is, and kind of talk about, in the more general sense, like where I think the real conspiracy lies in here. Do groups of elite folks want to belong to elite clubs and keep their friendship circles close and get those people jobs throughout their life? Yeah, because people do that. People, we've all been helped out by a friend. Like, that's not a crazy thing to think. But it's crazy when you realize that these people are becoming, in some cases, the president of the United States of America. Yeah. Then it becomes a little more questionable about if we should just be helping our friends because we went to the same fraternity that one time. Right. So, anyways, all right, so let's get into it. So, like we were talking before we started here, I did most of my research on like the before times. And we'll get to the weird shit that is known about and associated with Skull and Bones. But the history did actually put a lot into context for me. So Yale's in New Haven, Connecticut, and that New Haven is one of America's first planned cities, which I did not know. Yale University effectively employs and empowers the city of New Haven. Like, Yale is the biggest employer. It's a big institution there. Started from a donation of very simple supplies. Learning about the history of Yale and like how that became a school was pretty crazy, because it was just like they had a barn and then they got donated some stuff and built more facilities, and then it like slowly becomes an actual college campus that is comparable to a school like Harvard and to what it is now, which is like one of the most expensive and elite schools in the world. It's just funny to think that it like started in a barn. But doesn't everything,
That's
you know,
true.
if you go back far enough.
Yeah.
Graduates of Yale can include all sorts of folks, but notably there have been a lot of diplomats, 5 presidents, multiple Nobel Prize winners, and tons of other notable individuals from the highest ranks of society. Yale is the 3rd oldest higher education institution in the U.S., and it was founded in 1701. And it's one of the 9 colonial colleges chartered before the American Revolution. And just as a side note, Connecticut was the first colony to put witches to death. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's that is a good foundation to start the history of your school on. It was founded by Puritans in a decidedly Puritan environment. And a lot of people think the secret orgs that emerge in these schools, the secret orders, are kind of like a rebellious side effect of the serious repression. These were incredibly conservative. I don't know how much you know about the Puritans, but they were like the conservatives. They were. I don't want to butcher their beliefs, but it was basically like, even if you're a follower of God and you go to church every day, your salvation still isn't guaranteed, and you have to like punish yourself in your living life so that you can maybe hopefully get into heaven. They were like really savage in their beliefs.
Is that the same thing as like Quakers?
That's a really good question.
Because I always just think of like
the
meal thing. I just picture that guy.
I mean, that would be close. Okay, here we go. Although the Quakers may have resembled the Puritans in some religious beliefs and practices, they differed with them over the necessity of compelling religious uniformity in society. So the Quakers weren't as violent in making everybody accept their views, and their oatmeal is better. So
yeah, naturally,
it's just something to remember. When I see that
on there, it's a brand I trust.
As soon as I see that tri-corner hat, I know this oatmeal is going to be quality.
Yeah,
it's quality
top
oats. Notch. Okay, so this is where I'll kind of go back to what I was saying before. The scale of this shit is huge. Skull and Bones isn't even like the most notorious secret club at Yale. There's a bunch of others, and it might be the most famous or well known. Again, Skull and Bones, sure. Which is also known as the Order 332, the Brotherhood of Death. Again, even though it's on Yale's campus, none of these secret societies are owned by Yale. They're owned by private. These organizations were founded by sons of some of the most elite families. So they had like money and resources, and they, in many cases, as we'll get to, they make a trust. And the trust owns the secret society and the building, and the buildings and properties that the secret society owns all belongs to this trust. Because many of these children were trust fund kids. They came from insane inheritances and had resources even as a college student to put something like this together. Skull and Bones is the oldest, but there's also Scroll and Key, which is known to be the wealthiest. Wolf's Head, Book and Snake, Elihu, Berzelius, Mason Chain, and St. Elmo's. Okay.
Yeah.
And at all the other elite Ivy League institutions is the same thing. They call them different things at Princeton than they do at Harvard, than they do at Yale, but they're I think Princeton, they're like some supper clubs or lunch clubs. Okay. But it's the same thing. They have all these secret orders, and basically what these things kind of emerge as a way for these kids to focus. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like each of these schools might act as a feeder into certain institutions. Okay, so if you wanted to do certain things in your life, like go into politics or the upper echelons of business, you'd try and see about getting accepted into Skull and Bones. If you wanted to go into like writing or acting or performative arts, you might try and go to Scroll and Key. It's not to say that if you went into any of these secret societies that you were guaranteed to work in a specific industry, but that's kind of how these things work. You know, with Masonry to an even lesser degree, but if we're talking about like, if you wanted to work in stone, you'd want to find a bunch of Masons because they would teach you how to work stone. Conceptually, we'll take that to all the other secret societies we're going to talk about. If you want to do certain things, if you become a part of this one, the chances of you being around people that do that, being able to network and then excel in that field increases exponentially. Even as a Mason, like when I was becoming a Mason, it was like I could join any lodge, but each of the lodges might have a different focus. In New York, there's a lodge that just does stuff in Italian. That's it. There's another lodge that's for people who are in arts and entertainment. There's another lodge for people who do business, and another lodge for people who do this, and lodge for, you know, former military. Like each of the groups of guys, they clump together and they say, yes, I'm a part of this big club, but how we're going to do it is this way. And we're going to, you know, focus on it's just me and my plumber buddies, or me and my buddies that work on cars. You know, like that's it does kind of get broken down like that. We'll get into some of the famous members, but like Scroll and Key, Paul Giamatti is a Scroll and Key member.
I mentioned that in my research, I was surprised to learn that.
Like there are a lot of names that you're like, oh shit, really? That I didn't know that, but now that makes a lot of sense. Another person who's Scroll and Key is but again, just for instance here, another person who's a member of Scroll and Key is Cy Vance, who was the dad of the most recent DA for the city of Manhattan, the county of Manhattan.
Right.
And Cy Vance was a political person. He was not an arts and entertainment person. So again, just because you went to Skull and Bones or Scroll and Key or Wolf's Head, it didn't predestine you to work in a particular field, but it allowed you to network with people who were going to go out in the world. And at least Skull and Bones, part of it is disclosing your ambitions to people who could possibly help you achieve those ambitions once you graduate and all go out into the world. That was like the old school benefit of joining something like this. Same thing with any fraternity or sorority, any type of organization like that. It was networking with people who were like-minded in a certain way, who had a similar ambition or drive, or wanted to get something similar out of life. And back when these things were started, that was the fucking rage. Everyone did, like, secret clubs and orders were like social media before the internet, right? That's how people used to do this shit. And that tradition goes back a super long time, but in this scenario we're talking about like 1800s, 1700s. Anyway, so that's a little bit of context, and again, just a reminder that Skull and Bones, it's the oldest, but it's not. All those other ones, they have their own crazy histories, and all those other ones have, you know, Scroll and Key is the wealthiest, Wolf Head is this, you know, they each have their own little story and history that could be equally nefarious. But since Skull and Bones is the oldest, and its name is Skull and Bones and Brotherhood of the Death, it just immediately gets like this weird, you know, connotation. Anyways, so Skull and Bones is made up of 50. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that. What's funny too, because in my research, you know how it's the order of, you know, the order of 322. I really wanted 322 to have some, you know,
serious significance,
and it doesn't. It just doesn't. No. It's like the year that some Greek, like god or philosopher died, the year 320, and that was it. And I was like, kind of just let down by that. I thought maybe this has some cool meaning, but it doesn't. So,
well, and just like within the club, like I'm sure as the practices and traditions of the club evolved, they came up with like multiple meanings for what 322 means. But when you really boil it down, I mean, there's also I have this note on here somewhere, but basically, well, we'll get to that. But yeah, there's so much of this where you're like, man, I really wish that was more sinister than it really was. Now that I've looked into it.
But anyways, didn't mean to cut you off, but go ahead with what you were saying.
No worries. So we're basically just talking about like what is Skull and Bones. So you get tapped, and that comes from, like, back in the day, they would literally tap you on the shoulder and ask you if you wanted to be a part of it. Not everyone who was asked became a part of it. And it was typically juniors that would get tapped by seniors, and you would have, like, some kind of prominence on campus. You were big into Greek life, or you were big into student politics, or you were really smart, or, like, there'd be you'd have notoriety on campus, and that's why you would be tapped for these secret societies. Skull and Bones is made up of 15 members per year, and they meet on Thursdays and Sundays. And again, it was founded in 1832 by William Huntington Russell, who was inspired by occult societies that he saw in Germany, which were modeled after the Enlightenment era Illuminati. So when I say Illuminati, I don't mean Jay-Z and Diamond Hands. When I say Illuminati, I mean the actual Bavarian Illuminati. This was an actual group that existed, founded by this guy named Adam Weishaupt. This is where really, like, a bunch of the spooky history comes into play. Okay, so the actual Bavarian Illuminati, founded by Adam Weishaupt, existed really only a few decades before Russell. So, like, in the chronology of time, the Bavarian Illuminati didn't exist that much longer before Russell was alive and founding his own club. And the Bavarian Illuminati itself was kind of modeled after a lot of Freemasonic traditions, and it's supposed that Russell went over to Germany at some point in his youth, got connected with, or was already connected with, prominent people there, and witnessed what remained of this club. So the Bavarian Illuminati, it existed in a time when the free exchange of ideas and questioning conservative ideals was literally a crime, right? You could not do that. And Adam Weishaupt, I can't remember exactly what he was, but he was like a Jesuit scholar. Like, he worked for the church, but also wanted to question shit and have scientific conversations with like minds. So what he did is he founded this group called the Illuminati, the Illuminated, the Enlightened, and it was supposed to be a safe place where these folks could have open conversations before freedom of speech, the way that we know it, existed. And long story short, that ends up getting found out about, and the people that are involved are really pissed, or the people that were being duped were really pissed, mainly the church. So they, like, really go after Adam Weishaupt, who I'm pretty sure he escapes the country before they're really able to go after him. But what they find, supposedly, in the remnants of what remained of the club is like a plan to infiltrate Masonic lodges and governments and religions, and instill, like, this enlightened type of thinking and discourse from, like, the ground level into all these institutions. That's the whole conspiracy of the Illuminati. That's where that comes from. That's right there. That's where that comes from. It was this guy and his clandestine lodge who was, trying to enact a plan where they were going to infiltrate all these institutions and change them from the ground up. And in some ways they did, because that survived. Like, the Bavarian Illuminati gets splintered into a million different pieces, but people that knew about it, or people that were familiar with it, created their own, like, sideways Bavarian Illuminati, like, made from the remnants of what that organization was. And some of those ideals and practices did get into Masonic lodges and did get into the upper echelons of the priest class, and people kind of started to instill the things that were being talked about in those club meetings into actual that's real. It's not to say that the Illuminati infiltrated everything and took over the diamond. They're everywhere. It's not to say that. But what it is to say is that it did have some influence, and it did go on to affect like even founding fathers who were Masons. They were inspired by Bavarian Illuminati kind of stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. That was the rage of the time, was being able to think freely and discuss stuff that the church wouldn't let you discuss. They would fucking burn you at the stake for talking about it. So you had to do it in this secretive context. Or you want independence, and the only way for you to organize a revolution is by way of infrastructure of secrecy, so that you could have meetings and plan in secret, and no fucking British people would find out about the plan to overthrow the government. Like that's why these things existed. So that kind of gives you a little more context of why people would be doing that. It was like an egalitarian thing. It wasn't meant to, you know, control, to consolidate control down to one person. It was like, actually, the true purpose was to get enlightened thought into institutions that were against it at the time. And again, it worked to a degree, because some of those things did make it into the clubs of the time, the governments of the time, the conversations of elite circles of the time, and definitely into Freemasonic lodges, and then subsequently our government, which is heavily modeled after Freemasonic tradition. So, again, many of the ideals of democracy and freedom that Weishaupt talked about, they could have very well heavily influenced founding fathers and enlightened individuals of the upper echelon in and out of clubs. Like, they didn't necessarily need to be Masons to agree with that and want to be a part of an organization like that and get those traditions and ideals baked into the future of their world, or the future type of world that they wanted to see or live in. But that whole Illuminati conspiracy, that's where that comes from, because they actually did want to psychologically infiltrate all these institutions and change the way that world was being thought about. But again, for egalitarian purposes. We want to make the world a more informed and scientific and rational place. We have to be able to have informed, scientific, and rational discussions and not be burned at the stake by a religious figure for whatever reason. So anyways, that group breaks up and splinters all over Europe in different ways, and it is supposed that when Russell goes to Germany and sees these things, he's seeing, you know, a copy of a copy of a copy, and he wants to start his own. So he thought the whole secrecy thing was totally legit, secret organization thing, and him and the co-founder is Alphonso Taft, who is the father of future U.S. President William Howard Taft, who was also a bonesman. But Russell, he belonged to Phi Beta Kappa. I think there was another really big fraternity that he belonged to. He was a secretary of at that time, and he was also personally the heir to a fortune built from the opium trade. Which is fucking hilarious, I'm sure. And many, like, if you were to look into many of the students and the legacies that they come from, it would be some very sinister shipping. Very sinister shipping history. Like, all those Ivy League schools, if you look at founders and the first few classes, like, they weren't... They may have been innocent, but the fortunes that they were inheriting were not innocent at all. Right. But Russell was also valedictorian of the class of 1833. Again, like, he was a smart individual. He and all of these secret societies are supposed to, in some way, capture the most prominent students of that class, and you know, just again give them another leg up once they leave to rocket them into some kind of success, achieving whatever their goals are. But anyways, a lot of people ask why the secrecy. Well, again, Yale doesn't own this school, and then the same reason with Adam Weishaupt. Probably in the beginning of all of these things, the faculty at Yale was the biggest threat. The faculty at Yale didn't want kids meeting in secret and having, very blasphemous conversations. So they had to keep it secret. It couldn't be like Phi Beta Kappa. It couldn't be a well-known fraternity, because if it's well enough known, then it's going to be scrutinized. And if you're not doing something that the school or the faculty likes, they're just going to fucking outlaw your shit, so you can't do it. Right. So a lot of these things become, the secret orgs that they are. And expulsion, probably. Like that's like when we talk about the real stakes here, it's getting expelled. And to a kid from an elite family who at that time sole existence was to get a degree from one of those schools so they could become a banker or a shipper or whatever else, the few opportunities you had then, that'd be a major kick in the balls if you got expelled from Yale for talking about some fringe stuff. Okay, so 322. So there's a couple things where 322 might come from. Okay. As we were discussing, it was here, let me pull up the guy's name actually.
Yeah, I didn't want to take a stab. Demosthenes?
Demosthenes, right. Demosthenes, right.
Yeah.
Demosthenes died in 322, and supposedly that's where they get the number from. There's also the possibility that so it's supposed, and I haven't been able to find like the actual school that this would have been made a second chapter of, but it's supposed that Skull and Bones is a second chapter that is modeled after whatever the first chapter Russell witnessed in Germany was. So this would be the second. This would be the second chapter. And 322 would be two things. The fact that it was founded in 1832, and it was the second chapter. 322. That's another possible meaning for what that comes from.
Okay.
But the German thing is interesting because I really wanted to know what the German order was that they're modeling after, that Russell witnessed in Germany, that he wanted to start his own thing back in Yale. But the most I could find is that it was like a frat at a German college. I couldn't find any more information than that, which is pretty spooky. I love how spooky that is. And supposedly, to continue the German connection here, there's a German inscription above a symbolic painting gifted by the German order, whatever that German order is. And in English, that saying is, "Who is the fool? Who is the wise man? Beggar or king? Whether poor or rich, all's the same in death," which is super metal. And it's also super interesting because, again, egalitarian. That's an egalitarian thing. It's not saying we're more elite. It's not saying we're better than. What that's saying is that we're all equal in death. In death, we are all equal. So, just a little interesting little bit of tidbit there. So now we've kind of talked about the history. We've been going on for about 30 fucking minutes. Let's talk about Skull and Bones. Let's get down to the real nitty gritty here, Dave. So tell me, what do you know about the actual thing, Skull and Bones?
Well, one thing in doing the research on this, and you were mentioning how Skull and Bones, it's not the only society of these, especially at Yale. One of the things I noticed is that a lot of their initiation rituals are the same, and they all do it at the same time, and it's always like 15, members and juniors and whatnot. So that's one thing I found interesting. Of course, I looked through the notable people. Oh, actually, one of the things I did not know and I found super interesting was that the Skull and Bones owns their own island called Deer Island in upstate New York, right on the Canadian border. Basically, it's a small island, has a log cottage on there, and that's where they go to for bonding and all that stuff. Get together and rekindle old friendships, in quotes. And but I guess now it's just like a super rundown, like a place that's super outdated. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. Let's talk about this for a second. So yes, they do own an island, and it's at the up here close to Canada. It's at the 5 lakes or thousand islands. There we go.
Sure, yeah.
But it does exist. It is still owned by the Russell Trust Association, which is the group that endows Skull and Bones. And I found this very fringe website called New Ruins. And New Ruins doesn't have a lot, but it does have a whole little section on Deer Island. And again, like this probably had its heyday between the 30s and the 50s.
Sure, yeah.
Like this was a thing, especially elite families in New York and the Northeast. There were these clubs all over the place. Actually, the town that my parents live in now, Milford, Pennsylvania, that used to be like an escape in Pennsylvania for elite families back in the 1800s and the early 1900s. It was like the Poconos escape, and they used to have all these very fancy cabins and similar kind of shit. But now it is completely ruins, and there's a decent picture gallery here we can quickly go through. This is heyday, and this, you would have had to have accessed this by boat. It would have been at the time that this was an active place, it would have been real classy. It would have been like a very nice country club. But it has since fallen into a serious disrepair. In fact, most of the buildings have completely collapsed. I'm pretty sure the Big Lodge building is the only one that still exists. And this website is interesting because this website doesn't have much. I can't tell if this website is made just for the history of Deer Island, but it sure seems that way. And again, like there's this website's worth checking out. It's interesting history, and this is kind of background just on Skull and Bones, but there's a fucking handbook. Like from this is what you would, this is what you'd get when you would go there.
Huh.
It was like a very nice country club.
Right.
But anyways, that's Deer Island, and I was also scrolling through a list of collegiate secret societies so that people can kind of just see the scale of this shit.
I wonder if NTSU
Myth and Sword and I mean, society. I'm sure it does. Like I went down the rabbit hole. I found like a secret society at University of Nebraska. I'm sure every collegiate institution that's got like 100 years under their belt, I'm sure they all have their own form of whatever this is. Because even in looking into Nebraska's, I found Missouri and Iowa, like secret organizations for the oldest colleges there. And Middle Tennessee, I'm sure it does, but it's just not going to have the type of connotation that any of these
Sure.
any of these would. But I mean, this, like, if this gives you an idea, you know, this is a handful of schools, and these are all the known secret societies or honor societies, secretive honor societies. It's just interesting. There's a lot more than you'd think. But anyways, back to Deer Island, Russell Trust.
And so I was looking then through notable members, and, you know, of course, we got the 3 presidents, the Bushes, Prescott Bush, which I learned his nickname. I don't know why, but his nickname, because they give each other nicknames. But his nickname was the Japanese.
Who was that?
Prescott Bush.
Oh, Prescott Bush. Okay.
Like I said, I don't know why, but his nickname was the Japanese. But, of course, John Kerry, one of the people I found interesting is a guy named Thomas Osborne, and he was the co-discoverer of vitamin A. So what about that?
Oh, well then.
Yeah.
I see why he got his.
Exactly. There was a Charles Seymour. He was a founding member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yep.
And then Frederick Wallace Smith, the founder of FedEx, is also a Bones member. But I'm sure you'll see this too when you look through a lot of the older ones. For the most part, a lot of them are just, you know, political figures, bankers, and whatnot. But then as you kind of get newer, you'll start finding more random people that do different things, like, for instance, Paul Giamatti and those guys. But a name that really stuck out to me was Stephen Schwartz, and he's the co-founder of Blackstone, which, not to be confused with BlackRock, but they do similar things. Yeah. So,
that's you kind of touch bases on the big ones. So, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. I want to say there's a few Trilateral Commission people there. And, like, another big portion of the conspiracy conversation is, like, CFR and Trilateral Commission are, like, separate from government but have the influence of government and can influence governments. And the fact that, you know, there's so many Skull and Bones men who become members of these things and help steer, like, the future of politics. And again, that could be said about any of the secret societies at Yale or any of these other schools, because there are bonesmen there, but there are also people who are not bonesmen who are just as influential, if not within that organization, if not more influential or authoritarian in that organization than any of the Bones people. Another large portion of the conspiracy is that, like, CIA, a lot of CIA people or people who have gone on to work in the CIA originate from Bones, and particularly, like, the people that start the CIA. There's a whole dramatic movie that's committed to, you know, dramatizing that story called A Good Shepherd, that I've talked about a bunch on the show, and that is a great movie, but it's only partially true. Like, they talk about things that really happened, but they have to dramatize it for, you know, the sake of the audience. But there are a lot of very prominent people in the CIA who were Bonesmen, and it's not necessarily super fringe, because if you know someone can keep a secret, they might be a good candidate for an organization that's the whole thing is keeping secrets. Right? So, of course, an institution like that might be a good feeder for intelligence community shit, because they're already at a young age doing the whole taking an oath and, you know, keeping things secret, and not only not talking about what they're doing in there, but, like, anything that's disclosed to them in there about other members. It's kind of like it would have been a prime selection ground for people who were trying to build institutions that were 100% based around secrecy and, like, the most important national security secrets we need to know that person is not going to say shit. And maybe there's an element of even blackmail. Like, we know you have disclosed to us your biggest fears or, whatever weird shit you did in your life, and we could use that against you and ruin your career. So you keep your mouth shut. You have access to these things. Not only will we come after you with legal problems if you disclose these secrets, but we'll also destroy your image in a newspaper when we write an article about your deepest, darkest fears or some weird shit you did as a kid. There is like that kind of element to it, but yeah, I don't know. That's a weird one. Anyways, but we were also kind of like skimming through that list, and Prescott Bush was called the Japanese.
Yeah.
And George H.W. Bush was Magog, and Magog within the lore of Skull and Bones supposedly means like a very sexually prominent person. That was the nickname they would give to whoever the member was that was like the most sexually promiscuous, was Magog. And Gog, which is supposedly what George W. Bush's nickname was like the least sexually active, like the most repellent to sexual activity, which is hilarious. But Gog and Magog, those are from a biblical story, and a lot of people have tried to kind of make like a metaphorical, George Bush and his daddy do these things in real life, and metaphorically what that means is comparable to what was happening in the Bible and the story of Gog and Magog. But that within the lore of Skull and Bones, that's what Magog and Gog means. But I want to say for a while George W. Bush couldn't come up with a name, or like couldn't decide on one, and so for a while they were calling him like undecided or the temporary. There's like some really stupid, and it sounded super George W. Bush. Like, I can't pick a name. Here, why don't you just call me the temporary? I
mean, yeah.
There are a couple books, and I guess this is where we'll get into like what is known of Skull and Bones. There's a couple books. There's this book by a guy named Chris Milligan, Fleshing Out Skull and Bones. This book is kind of referred to quite frequently, but this one analyzes Skull and Bones from a purely sinister perspective, completely sinister perspective, in that these world leaders are all getting together and deciding the fate of America in that room, and then getting jobs in areas of government where they can enact those things. That's his mentality behind it. And to be fair, if you look into the history of George, even just the Bushes, but Prescott and Herbert Walker Bush, there's tons of sinister shit there. You really don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole to be like, maybe there were some deals that they made in the tomb that it became a priority for them to make sure became a reality when they got into government. And looking at HW becomes director of the CIA, then becomes vice president, then becomes president, then his son becomes president. It's a very strange trajectory that we don't see too often. Another book is called America's Secret Establishment. This is written by Anthony Sutton. And this kind of characterizes this more as, again, this sentence is perfect. The book reveals that far from being a campus fraternity, the society is more concerned with the success of its members in the post-collegiate world. And that's his analysis, is that this is really just it's a one of many at Yale and one of many at other elite institutions that is just a feeder for government and the upper echelons of business. And then there is this one by Alexandra Robbins, and this one's like the most explosive. So when anyone talks about any of the ceremonies or shit that goes on inside the tomb, they're really probably referencing Alexandra Robbins' book, because she interviews former girlfriends of bonesmen. She interviews a few bonesmen who are willing to talk, and people who were, on Yale campus and near the tomb and were at least somewhat tangentially aware or had experiences with it. Mm-hmm. But again, this sentence is great. Robbins explains why this old boy product of another time still thrives today. Her thesis is this is just yet another frat in a school of elitism, another way for elitists to feel more elite and then forge connections with people that will benefit them beyond college. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much you got into, supposedly what goes on inside there.
Just kind of the usual stuff, that they have to drink fake blood. There's one, they have to lay in coffins. What's the one where they have to masturbate and then talk about all their deepest sexual fantasies and history and whatnot? So stuff like that for blackmail. And then I saw something where some guy had taken a video. It's very similar to Alex Jones's video of Bohemian Grove, where you can see what it is, but you can't really make out what it is that they're doing, but they make it sound sinister. But it's there's somebody screaming in the background, and sure, yeah, but I imagine a lot of it is very your typical fraternity hazing ritual kind of stuff.
Well, one thing that I did learn that I was not expecting to learn was that, again, these organizations, they are a product of their time. And for a very long time, they are very, at least up until the point past all Bushes. Yeah. 60s, 70s. But in the 70s, they start to get kind of aggressively egalitarian again. So this used to be mostly associated with white upper crust males from specific families. That's the typical people who would be the prominent folks selected to be a part of these things. But then in the 70s and 80s, there's a real heavy push to let gay folks in, to let women in, to let black folks in, be much more representative of the true changing diversity of those college campuses. And in some cases, the old guard from a lot of the trusts that controlled those bodies were pissed. They hated it. But now a lot of these secret societies are much more egalitarian than you would think. And again, that goes to the principles that they were founded under. They were founded under progressive ideals, and these clubs existed as a way for people to expand their minds in a progressive way in a very conservative environment like Yale or Harvard. And the initiation ceremonies, I'm sure there's an element of divulging secrets, the idea of controlling secrets or knowing secrets or having some kind of vested interest in the secrecy. That's a part of these types of clubs, and at something like this, for sure. Whether they're masturbating in a coffin, I don't know, but that is hilarious to think about.
Yeah.
It is really hilarious to think about, and it's also really hilarious to think that at some point in their government career, they're making a decision based on their allegiance to Skull and Bones because they told somebody about an awkward sexual experience one time. Sure, and they're so nervous about that awkward sexual experience that they had being put in the New York Times that they're just doing whatever they have to do. That's the fucking glue that's making them sell out, their position. It is, again, interesting. I also want to make sure I give a shout out to. I watched a bunch of videos. But this video was possibly my favorite. Dan Cummins, he has a 3-hour, he goes into great detail and has a very rational take on this whole situation. Of all the videos I watched, this was the most sensical. Okay. It made the most sense, and it was the most... A lot of the other videos that I would find in here were like History Channel level shit, where it's like, oh my god, it's Skull and Bones. And again, that I'm not saying that there isn't an element of that, and we can, I guess maybe in XLB we'll talk a little bit more about like the more possible sinister analysis of this group, but it's after doing a fair amount of research, I feel like it's a little more prosaic than, a little more general than general fraternity. Sure. than again, not saying it was that way at all points, not saying that shit hasn't been decided there before it gets decided in real life elsewhere, but now, from what these organizations look like now, they really don't seem, that whatever power they may have had 50 years ago, it's not the same thing anymore. And again, sure. that would make sense because the demographics of the school have changed. The people that are going there change, and the people that are subsequently becoming members of these clubs are different, and they change and evolve. And I don't know. I really feel like the real sinister shit is like from the 30s to the 60s. Because that, and we will definitely go into that on XLB, because that is like the weirdest time frame. But even like the Kerry Bush Bonesman thing, like that maybe was a little weird then when the election was going on. But looking at how politics has devolved in the past 15 years, that actually seems... But in comparison, that seems more normal. Yes, they were both bonesmen. Yes, they both went into politics. Yes, they both ran for president. And when Kerry lost, he said, you know what? You're right, I lost. I didn't get the votes. I concede. You are now the president. Because politics was somewhat civil then. It was still somewhat civil then. And it took politics getting as fucked as they are now for me to look back at that and be like, that's not really as sinister as I thought it was when it was happening. Right. But could be much worse. It could be much worse. Yeah. All right, yeah, let's we're going to tap out here. If you want to hear more of the sinister analyses of this situation, you'll have to join us over on Patreon on XLB. You can only get XLB on Patreon, so if you want XLB, that's where you're going to have to go. Dave, I want to thank you again for coming down this very strange road with me. I feel like we just keep going down weird scenarios. Who knows what weird thing we're going to come up with next? Exactly. Is there anything else you want to give a shout out to before we wrap up the free portion that's going on YouTube for the free listeners?
If you haven't yet, in one of the Knights camps, we still got our new single, If It Means That Much to You, out. You can go check that out. Also, Daniel.
I'll put the link in there.
Yeah, thank you. And Daniel's other project, Taskill, for the heavier fans. He's been working on that for a while. Yeah. Now that's out, and it's pretty deep. So, just check those things out.
I've really been loving Taskill's all the interesting video content, blurring the faces. It's been super cool to watch that. Watch that come out, and of course I'll put all one of these nights links and the Taskill links in the description for folks that want to check it out. This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dave, and we'll catch everybody on the next time. See you later.
See you around.
This has been the Totally Legitimate Business Podcast. The end. With your host, James Oliva. Executive producers, Clint G and James Oliva. Literally no one cares. Sound design, mix, and master by James Oliva. When will this end? Thank you for listening. Now get back to work. Moving along.